In this lesson, we're going to complete a watercolor study of your colored object. In my case, it's a Coleman's mustard jar. I've sketched it here on my page. You're working in your multimedia pad. And I made sure it's symmetrical, that the ellipses align across horizontally. And when I had trouble, I placed those ellipses in boxes to make sure that all four quadrants were equal. Okay? Now we're going to do a watercolor study, so I want you to look at your chart of your triads, this chart that we completed, and decide which triad is going to work for your object. For my object, my Coleman mustard jar, I feel like this triad is the best combination for me. So it's purple, yellow, and red. So I have the complement and the one extra color. Now, obviously, your triad will be different, okay? So let me just put the colors that I'm using right at the bottom here. I'm using yellow. I'm using my purple. We're using the exact same colors that are on our chart, okay? And my extra color is red, okay? So that is the triad that I'm going to use. All right, so let's begin. Now, my mustard jar is mostly yellow, okay? The label is entirely yellow, except for some gray detail and some red lettering, okay? So when you paint a watercolor, you're going to go in with the lightest color first. And you're going to leave what are going to be the highlights, the white paper, as just the white paper, okay? Highlights are just the white paper, okay? So in this case, I'm going in with yellow. This is my lightest color in my triad. And I'm not worrying about the shadow pattern, okay? I'm taking my yellow on to the shadow side of my object, okay? And I'm going to show you how to do the shadow in a little bit, okay? So I'm laying in my lightest color, which is yellow, okay? I'm not worried about the letters. I'm going right over my mustard letters, okay? One thing I'm going to do, besides leaving my highlights white at this stage, I'm also going to consider the curve of my mustard jar here, and I'm going to make it a little bit lighter right in the middle of my jar to kind of give me a sense that there's more light in that area. Okay. And then I make sure it's just a little bit darker toward the outside edge and moving into the shadow area. Okay. Now my mustard jar has a yellow lid, so I'm going to keep going here. All right, lay in my yellow base. Leaving my highlight white. Now I know for many of you this is the first time you're using watercolors, so it's always better to make it a little pale and then go in and darken it if you need to. It's much harder to lighten it. Okay, so there's my yellow base. Okay, I'm going to let that dry for a little bit. And now I want to consider the shadow of my label. Now it is a sort of browned yellow, okay, because it's falling away from the light source. So when we created these triads, we were using complements, okay? So I'm going to create that sort of dull yellow color by taking my yellow and adding the purple into it, okay? Because now I'm neutralizing that yellow, all right, until I get it the right value, all right? And then on top of the base that I already have, I'm going to add that darker yellow, which is neutralized with my complement. Okay, now if your complement is blue and orange, you're going to use a blue-orange combination. And just decide whether you want it to go more towards the orange or more towards the blue, that color, okay? In my case, I want it to go more towards the yellow, okay? Now I'm going to look at my lid. My lid has some of the same color on it. Side plane of the lid. Okay. Remember, be specific about the shadow pattern, and this will help your image, okay? All right. Still leaving the highlights, okay? All right. Next, I'm going to go in with the glass part of my jar. And it's kind of like a cool neutral. So I'm going to take my purple, and I'm just going to add just a teeny bit of the yellow to it. Okay, not too much at this stage, because I want it to appear not dull, but luminous. Okay. Never put too much paint on your brush at one time, okay? All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to look at my jar and see where I need it to be darker. Now when you deal with glass has a lot of reflections in it, so be very, very conscious of those reflections. Okay. And that'll help give a sense of realism to it. All right, so again, I've used my purple, and then I slightly dulled it with just a little bit of the yellow. Okay. And I'm being conscious of some of the reflections that are in there. All right, now I'm going to go to the bottom. Bottom's a little bit darker, so I think I'm going to use just a little bit more purple. And I want to make sure that I'm kind of rushing here just to get it in the video, but make sure that like my purple's not going to run into my label here. So be kind of conscious of letting certain things dry before you go in with the opposite color. Okay, on the color wheel. All right. I really like some of these reflections. They're really very, very cool looking. And let the watercolor just be watercolor too. All right. Now I feel like I need some more darks at the top. So I'm going to go in and do that. I'm going to dull it just a little, so I want it to be a little browner and grayer. I'm going to start adding some of that, so I have a little more contrast. All right. So make sure you're looking at your object while you're doing this in its light situation, okay? And be conscious of what's happening, just like we would if we were drawing this in pencil or charcoal. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to consider my cast shadow on the table. And that is even grayer. So I'm going to mix up more of my purple and then add a definitive amount of yellow into that. Okay. So I've changed the nature of what's in that cast shadow. It doesn't look exactly like the jar, but there's a sense of relationship, right? Okay, and I know my cast shadow is lighter as it moves outward toward the end, so make sure you do some of that. All right. So moving along, I might spend a little more time in this purple. Actually, let me do this real quick. I'm just going to add a couple of little darker accents again in the jar, okay, that relate to the shadow a little bit. All right. Okay, just a little more contrast there. Okay, now I'm going to look at my label. And my label has like some gray, just words on it, nothing particularly interesting. I'm going to use my purple. Now if you see it's a yellow base, I'm going to put a little purple on top, so it's going to be neutralized just by that fact. And this label has like, it's got, you know, a crown on it, it's got words, it's got a picture of a cow and a wreath, which even looking at it from this distance I can hardly see that, so I'm going to simplify that into this shape here. This is my cow in the wreath. Okay, it's something that's very hard to distinguish. Okay, I'm going to add that in, and then there's something about the weight at the bottom here. So I'm going to just give an impression of that. All right, so the last color of my triad, which is just the accent color, is the red, okay? And that's the lettering. So let's get into that, okay? And I'm using the scarlet and the alizarin, okay? And I'm going just a little bit drier on this because I need to get these letters rather skinny. Okay, so make a point on your brush, drier application, okay? I'm gonna slowly add those in. Now remember, the jar in this case is curved, and most likely you're going to have a curved surface too if you do the hot sauce or peppers or a can of tomatoes, okay? So your letters, if you're not looking at the whole label, there's going to be a lot of foreshortening, so be conscious of that. And don't give me a label straight on, okay? That will flatten your image by trying to letter in that way, okay? I'm trying to work quickly here so you can see the overall effect. Okay? All right, so this gives you the general impression of my object. I could spend just a little bit more time on this, but you know, this is the gist of what I'm looking for, okay? I've used a triad of colors. I started with my lightest color, in this case it's yellow, and the highlights. The highlights are always the white of the paper. Watercolor looks more luminous when it's applied lightly and some of the white paper shows through, okay? Then I created my neutrals by mixing the complements, in this case yellow and purple, to get my grays and browns. And then I'm left with red as my extra color of the triad, and that is my accent color. Now let's just say on my label there was one little green fleck of something. That I could mix and I could add, not really part of my triad, but as a little extra. That's possible. But please try as hard as you can to stick to 3 colors. And I can't wait to see what your piece will look like.